On TV, the Golden Girls appeared to be greatest friends, but the truth is far more sinister. Flirting with the crowd irritated B. Estelle Getty was so scared that she was unable to recall her line, and she was so upset that she wouldn't talk to Betty when she won an Emmy before anybody else. Even the casting director overheard B. characterize Betty with a startling term. You'll be shocked to learn the truth about these TV grandmothers. Let's start by reviewing the history of the four Golden Girls. Soon after graduating from high school, Betty White started working in radio. However, everything changed in 1949, when she appeared on a brand new live television program called Hollywood. It was broadcast on KLAC-TV, ran for 5 hours every day, 6 days a week, in Los Angeles. Initially, Betty co-hosted with a man named Al Jarvis, which was taxing and unlike anything else on television. She temporarily appeared on film alongside actor Eddie Albert when he left in 1951, but Betty quickly took up the role on her own. She became the first female talk show host ever as a result. She spent hours talking directly into the camera, doing everything she could to pass the time. Sketches, jokes, and finally visitors. Betty may have been the first woman to ever appear on television, according to some. In 1939, when television was ever widely available, she sang songs from The Merry Widow in a test transmission while still a high school student. At the age of 28, Betty performed something unprecedented in 1952, and she co-founded a TV production firm while still living with her parents. Was named after her dog, Bandit, and was dubbed Bandy Productions. She began it alongside producer Don Fedderson and writer George Tibbles. Betty was one of the first women in the United States to co-own a production firm during a period when males controlled nearly every aspect of television. She was able to manage what transpired behind and in front of the camera as a result. Life with Elizabeth was their first major undertaking. Originally a brief segment on her talk show, it developed into a full-length program that ran nationwide from 1953 until 1955. In addition to starring in it, Betty also produced it. In 1952, she received a local Emmy for the program. History was made. She was the first female producer and star of a comedy. Betty was a popular game show guest as well. She gained notoriety in the 1960s and 1970s for her witty banter and impeccable timing. Password was never hosted by her. Alan Ludden, her husband, did. However, she was a frequent and memorable visitor. She then smashed yet another milestone in 1983. Betty was the first female recipient of the Outstanding Game Show Host Daytime Emmy. She won for hosting NBC's Just Men. She became well known in American homes because to her performances on game programs, they contributed to the development of the endearing humorous character that viewers adored in her sitcom performances. Betty achieved a unique feat in television by winning 7 Emmy Awards over many decades at the end of her life. Betty's career was permanently altered in 1973 when she was cast in a guest role. In The Lars Affair, a Mary Tyler Moore Show episode, she portrayed Sue Ann Nivens. On the exterior, Sue Ann seemed a happy TV housewife, but she was actually sly and feisty. It wasn't written with Betty in mind. The producers chose to ask the genuine Betty White, because the screenplay just asked for a Betty White type. They were first hesitant as she was good friends with Mary Tyler Moore. However, Betty dominated the part. Despite being intended as a one-time character, audiences adored Sue Ann. Betty continued to appear on the program and took home consecutive Emmys in 1975 and 1976. That role was so powerful that it nearly followed her to her next major position. Betty was first chosen to play the flirtatious Blanche in the casting of The Golden Girls. Long before she played Dorothy Zbornak, B. Arthur was already a Broadway star. She co-starred with Angela Lansbury as Vera Charles in the musical Mame in 1966. She received a Tony Award for Best Featured Actress even though she had desired the main part. She had previously portrayed Yente, the matchmaker in Fiddler on the Roof in 1964, and participated in the Three Penny Opera. The only person who had brought her to tears was the director Jerome Robbins, with whom she had a falling out during that performance, and whom she later described as a terrible human being. She made the switch to television in 1971. She was hired as Maude Findlay by Norman Lear in an episode of All in the Family, and the role was so well received that CBS granted her a spin-off, Maude, which aired from 1972 to 1978. Years before the Golden Girls debuted in 1985, she was already a feminist TV star, having won an Emmy in 1977. After relocating to New York in 1957, Rue McClanahan began her career as a theater performer. In 1968, after more than a decade, she made her Broadway debut in Dustin Hoffman's musical Jimmy Shine. The play led to TV roles and ran for 161 performances. Her comedic skills were evident when she joined Maude as Vivian Harmon via Arthur's Friend. She portrayed Caroline Johnson, a crazy nanny, in the serial opera Another World, and then Margaret Jardin in Where the Heart Is. The two actresses developed a relationship from that episode that aided them later in The Golden Girls. Rue went on to win an Emmy in 1987 for her portrayal of the flirtatious Southern belle Blanche Devereaux. After decades of arduous theater effort, she finally achieved success. It took a lot longer for Estelle Getty to become famous. At the age of 62, she finally landed her big part after 40 years of striving to succeed as an actor. She portrayed Dorothy's acerbic mother, Sophia Petrillo. She failed her first two Golden Girls auditions because producers felt she looked too young to play someone in her 80s, despite the fact that in real life she was more than a year younger than Bea Arthur. She pleaded with the cosmetic artist to age her appropriately when she arrived for her third attempt dressed in outdated attire. "This is just a job to you," she informed him, "but unless you make me look 80, I see my entire career as a failure." Her perseverance paid off. She was in Los Angeles at the time, filming the Torch Song trilogy. Prior to this, she mainly got modest film roles while doing office jobs to support her family, like a fleeting cameo in Tootsie. She became a fan favorite because of her impeccable timing and witty remarks as Sophia, such as informing Blanche that her life is an open blouse. Despite Sophia's intended role as a supporting character, Getty became one of the show's most adored performers and won an Emmy in 1988. A humorous incident occurred during an NBC promotional program in the fall of 1984. Selma Diamond from Night Court and Doris Roberts from Remington Steele were doing a sketch together. During the segment, Diamond remarked, "Miami Nice," after mispronouncing the show's name Miami Vice. "It must be about some elderly folks playing pinochle while lounging about." Everyone chuckled. It was only a joke. Warren Littlefield, one of the men present, however, noticed something more. The concept of a sitcom featuring elderly ladies remained with him as the senior vice president of comedy development at NBC. Something unexpected resulted from that casual remark. Littlefield reversed the custom of waiting on authors to provide him a script. He presented the concept to writer Susan Harris right away. Harris was interested even though it was uncommon to have elderly ladies at the center of a television program. It would be regarded as one of the luckiest incidents in television history by author Matt Baum years later. The Golden Girls, a program that would get 68 Emmy nominations and win 11 of them, was born out of that joke. The casting strategy first appeared to be somewhat different. The producers wanted Rue McClanahan to play Rose, the innocent gentlewoman, and Betty White to play Blanche, the flirtatious Southern woman. It was logical. McClanahan had portrayed the erratic Vivian on Maude, and White had filled a similar character on the Mary Tyler Moore program. Bea Arthur, however, was unimpressed. "Rue, I don't want to do Maude and Vivian meet Sue Ann Nivens," Arthur stated when McClanahan called to inform her about the proposal. Dull. Jay Sandridge, the show's pilot director, made a wise choice that altered everything. He urged McClanahan to read for Blanche rather than Rose during the audition process. He then asked White to read to Rose. Everything changed with that switch. Arthur agreed to join since he loved the new direction. The ladies were able to escape their previous typecast roles and create two memorable personalities thanks to the last-minute role change. Sophia's actress, Estelle Getty, has her own path. Getty was younger than both White and Arthur, while being the elder role she portrayed. She put through 45 minutes of makeup every day to look the part, but her transformation into Sophia was aided by more than just cosmetics. She shopped for things that would make her stand out in the Fairfax neighborhood of Los Angeles before to her audition. She then discovered a little wicker handbag. She incorporated it into Sophia's appearance since it appeared ideal. The wardrobe department created a backup in case something were to happen to it because it became so legendary. In a 2011 interview, Betty White discussed her tumultuous relationship with her Golden Girls co-star Bea Arthur, a topic that fans had been curious about for years. Betty said that she didn't really like me over 20 years after the show finished. Sometimes she was a pain in the neck. Betty claimed that her upbeat demeanor frequently annoyed Bea. She would occasionally become enraged if I was joyful. She laughed as she spoke, shocked a lot of people, particularly those who only witnessed Rose and Dorothy's friendship on film. However, the two maintained their professionalism despite the animosity that existed behind the scenes. They both received Emmys for their efforts on the program, yet they never let it impair their acting. Then there was another twist. Joel Thurm, a casting director at NBC during the Golden Girls period, made a startling assertion in a 2023 Candid book. He claimed to have heard Bea Arthur use an extremely derogatory and nasty term to describe Betty White. Thurm said that the actress who played Blanche, Rue McClanahan, had said the same thing. However, subsequent stories said that Rue just referred to Betty as a bit of a handful. Thurman thought that the women's disparate performance styles were the main source of the conflict. Was sincere, an actor with training in theater who need room to get ready. Betty, however, wore her hair lighter and more casually. Bea didn't like that she practiced differently and liked to talk to the audience in between scenes. Matthew Sachs, Bea's son, provided a more sympathetic viewpoint years later. He said in an interview that his mother related it to the notion that everyone needs a neighbor who irritates them, just so happened to be Bea's person. Nevertheless, Matthew made it apparent that his mother enjoyed Betty in her own way and even went on rides with her in the first few seasons of the program, despite their ups and downs. A significant conflict in working approaches was at the core of it all. Bea was from Broadway, where it was customary to remain in character and pay close attention in between takes. Betty comes from game shows and live television. She was accustomed to keeping things light, joking with the audience and flirting with them. During breaks, Betty would occasionally raise her skirt and laugh with spectators, according to Jim Colucci, the author of a book about the performance. Bea, who took every performance very seriously and clung to her script until the last minute, didn't like that type of behavior. The Golden Girls cast's tension initially became apparent at the 1986 Emmy Awards. For Best Lead Actress in a Comedy Series, all 4 actresses received nominations. However, the winner of the prize was Betty White. Bea Arthur wasn't happy with that victory. Bea was so enraged that he even called Betty a horrible term backstage, according to Rue McClanahan's account. For Bea, the serious, stage-trained actress had always been who she was. She disregarded Betty as a game show personality from her Password days and didn't think much of her. Some claim that Betty's early victory caused a rift that never really went away, despite the fact that all 4 of them went on to win Emmys, Rue in 1987 and Bea and Estelle Getty in 1988. It wasn't made any easier by their acting. Betty would immediately commit her lines to memory, and occasionally she would even add gags that the authors adored. She added a playful, amiable vibe to the set, and loved engaging with the studio audience in between parts. However, Bea held on to her writing until the very last minute. She frequently walked backstage between takes to maintain her attention since she enjoyed being in character. She simply didn't think such breaks were the appropriate time to socialize, her son subsequently clarified. Bea found it annoying and distracting, whereas Betty could do it without losing concentration. Bea became increasingly irritated as the program continued. She had become weary of the jokes about her character, Dorothy, by the 8th season. The comments about Dorothy frequently felt personal, in contrast to the other characters, Rose's foolishness, Blanche's romantic life, and Sophia's age. They made fun of her height, voice, and appearance. It seemed to Bea that not only Dorothy, but also she was being ridiculed. She even questioned the authors about why they continued to portray Dorothy as uncomfortable or ugly. Even though it was still one of the most popular TV programs, NBC even attempted to cast Debbie Reynolds in a test episode. But Bea opted to stay for one more season before leaving the show permanently because of this irritation. On set, there was also a subdued melancholy as Estelle Getty started having trouble with her lines. Estelle was younger than Bea, Despite playing Dorothy's mother, Sophia, people noted she was struggling to recall what to say about the third season. It was initially attributed to nervousness, but it grew worse with time. Some claim that in front of the live audience, Betty made fun of Estelle's amnesia. Others think that by using humor to divert attention and give Estelle some time to heal, Betty was genuinely attempting to assist. Estelle first wrote her lines on props before switching to cue cards. Betty White and Rue McClanahan had a genuine relationship that lasted the entire 7 years The Golden Girls was broadcast, despite the fact that other cast members didn't always get along. Between takes, they developed the daily practice of playing word games, which they both adored. Always had a game going off camera, someone once noted. They would make minor riddles for one another during pauses in the filming process, which they would subsequently solve once the task was over. But their relationship went beyond gaming. Because Betty knew Rue adored animals, she even informed Rue when Mary Tyler Moore's brother had pups. Rue adopted her third puppy as a result of that recommendation. Despite B. Arthur's disapproval, Rue occasionally even joined Betty in conversing with the audience in between scenes. However, things weren't always easy behind the scenes. After the show, Rue revealed something unexpected in an interview. B. Arthur refused to attend lunch unless Betty did. Fans were taken aback by this, as it deviated from the widely held belief that B and Betty were not friendly. It seems like B would wait for Betty to dine with her, even if she was running late. During shooting weeks, they even sat next to each other at restaurants on Friday nights. Verified that they ate lunch together nearly every day in her memoirs. It's odd considering Bea reportedly thought Betty's upbeat demeanor was bothersome. However, it's obvious that their relationship was more than simply disagreement. It was difficult. Under all the stress, there could even be a friendship of some sort. The enigma surrounding their link was further compounded by another element. Early on in the run of the show, in fact, Bea and Betty carpooled together. For a while, they traveled together to the NBC studio in Burbank, and they lived near to one another in Los Angeles. Around 1988, as their relationship began to deteriorate, this came to an end. Bea's dissatisfaction with Betty's interactions with the live audience may have contributed to the shift. Those who knew them said there was considerable conflict between their styles. Betty liked to keep things light and engage the audience, whereas B was more somber and theater-schooled. As those divisions deepened, what had begun as a mutually beneficial carpool between co-stars gradually deteriorated. Rue McClanahan was frequently caught in the midst of everything. She had previously collaborated with Bede on Maude, and it was B who initially persuaded her to join the Golden Girls. Rue provided a balanced assessment of B and Betty's relationship in her memoir. Although it never interfered with their job, she claimed it wasn't as close as she had hoped. Rue always made an effort to be upbeat about the group. She once remarked that despite the stress behind the scenes, the set was still a cheerful environment, even when things weren't ideal. However, she acknowledged that when Betty won an Emmy in 1986 before her, B was furious. B apparently took offense at that point and was enraged by it. Nevertheless, the concert held up well to the very end because of Rue's consistent presence and the expertise of all those involved. The Golden Girls' acerbic Sophia, played by Estelle Getty, had a covert conflict that persisted throughout the series. Although the public saw a self-assured humorous figure, Getty was frequently frightened behind the scenes. The day before filming, she started experiencing severe stage fright. Her co-star Rue McClanahan reportedly remarked that it was evident in her like a gloomy fog that followed her around. Getty would grow aloof by the time they were prepared to record, and inaccessible. Television was different, despite her prior theater acting experience, which included a well-received role in Torch Song Trilogy. She was overwhelmed by the fast-paced live crowd. Things became so difficult by 1988 that despite the fact that using cue cards was often regarded as unprofessional, producers ultimately let her to do so. She made an effort to relax as much as she could. Despite continual line practice, hypnosis and help, nothing actually helped. The program even hired someone to assist her remember her lines at one point. The worry persisted though. Getty was 62 when the program debuted in 1985, but her character Sophia was considerably older. She had a 45-minute metamorphosis each day. A white wig, large spectacles, a lot of makeup, and fake wrinkles. Many admirers didn't even recognize her outside of costume since it worked so well. Actually, she was younger than Bea Arthur, who portrayed her daughter on the program, which is ironic. Getty discovered strategies to conceal her memory loss. She also incorporated some of her gaffes into Sophia's appeal by writing phrases on props like her famous wicker handbag. Even in difficult situations, her performance was sustained by her inventiveness. However, off-camera, it may feel lonely. Getty was asked if the group spent time together outside of work in an interview conducted in 1987. "Really, we all have such different lives," she said. "They won't allow me hang out with them, even though I would really like to." It was a depressing look at the dynamics of actual life. They were good pals on television. In actuality though, the relationship wasn't always present. The others would talk and joke around with each other during breaks. They would occasionally even make jokes about how much they resembled the Golden Girls. However, Getty frequently felt excluded. Getty had only begun acting professionally at the age of 55, in contrast to her co-stars who had lengthy television careers. She was somewhat frightened by the others' experience and admired them. They helped form the writers' lines through close collaboration. That's not what Getty did. In fact, she was so nervous that she frequently requested less lines. She still had a strong affection for them. Even though Rue McClanahan had a broken arm, Getty came to support her when she participated in the Vagina Monologues in 2001. She was determined not to disappoint her pal. Her gentle devotion revealed a lot about her true nature. After 7 wildly successful seasons, Arthur left the Golden Girls in May 1992. The cherished series ended as a result of that choice. Golden Girls Forever by Jim Colucci claims that Arthur had become more and more irritated with the author's jokes about her character, Dorothy. She was frequently the target of their jokes, calling her ugly and huge. Arthur took it personally, but the other actresses were able to laugh off the eccentricities of their characters. She was 70 years old by early 1992, and had already made the decision not to return for an 8th season. She expressed to the producers her belief that the show's quality was beginning to decline. She had already made a daring departure. Years before, while the program was still doing well, she had made the same decision with Maude. She believed the authors were running out of decent material, and the onerous job was too much for her at her age, as her son Matthew Sachs subsequently clarified. In 2009, Arthur died a few weeks before his 87th birthday. Following her departure, NBC created a spin-off called The Golden Palace in an attempt to preserve the enchantment. Estelle Getty, Rue McClanahan, and Betty White went back to work. However, their characters now own a hotel. Don Cheadle as the hotel manager and other guest stars gave the play a great start, but the audience left quickly. Despite a few attempts, such as having Bea Arthur return for 2 episodes, the show was unable to recover from the sharp decline in ratings. After just 24 episodes and 1 season, it was cancelled, leaving numerous plotlines unresolved. There was something fundamentally lacking without Dorothy. The cast didn't resemble the beloved figures on TV. It was frequently stated that none of us were like our personalities. Betty White, in her opinion, was the least suitable for her job. Estelle Getty possessed Sophia's timing, but not her daring, because White's quick wit and sharp intelligence were so distinct from Rose's charming cluelessness. Getty actually experienced extreme stage fright. The day before filming, she would become quite nervous and frequently had trouble remembering her lines. Getty repeatedly asked filmmakers to make the characters Jewish. Despite her portrayal of a fierce Italian mother, she would have felt more at ease doing it. Additionally, tension existed behind the scenes despite the women's seeming closeness on television. The main point of contention was between Betty White and Bea Arthur. Casting director Joel Therms disclosed in a 2023 podcast that Arthur had described White in extremely negative terms. According to Arthur's son, White ended up being the person his mother needed to be angry at most of the time. It's possible that their disparate methods of operation caused the friction to begin. Arthur thought it was disrespectful and annoying, since White enjoyed talking to the studio audience in between takes. Jealousy also existed, particularly following White's 1986 win of the group's first Emmy. Despite working side by side for years, McClanahan reportedly said Arthur was upset and outraged about it. The ensemble seldom spent time together off-set for years. She complained, but Arthur refused to go to lunch until White joined her. They spent the most of their off-screen time together at work-related functions or award presentations. The warmth and humor they produced on TV were all the more remarkable because of that distance.